The thin line between wealth and poverty can't be measured in dollars, but in the capacity to see beyond your own world. For Emma Carter, survival meant counting pennies between paychecks and sleeping in airport lounges between flights. She'd learned early that kindness costs nothing but matters most when you have nothing else to give. That December morning at Pearson International, Emma's uniform hid 3 days of exhaustion, her smile masking the eviction notice in her pocket. When she spotted the silver-haired woman struggling with her luggage, arthritic hands trembling, eyes clouded with confusion, Emma didn't hesitate. She couldn't have known that James Wilson, heir to a real estate empire, was watching from the shadows. Or that his mother's dropped bag would become the first domino in a chain that would transform 3 lives forever. Some connections are forged in a heartbeat. Some hearts recognize each other across impossible divides. The terminal clock read 6:17 a.m. as Emma Carter suppressed another yawn. 36 hours on duty, with only catnaps between Toronto and Vancouver and back again. Her uniform, once pressed and pristine, now hung slightly rumpled on her slim frame. 3 more hours until she could collapse in the crew apartment she shared with 4 other flight attendants, where her portion of the rent consumed nearly 2/3 of her paycheck. The early morning crowd surged around her, business travelers with expensive luggage, families heading to winter vacations, airport employees beginning their day. Emma navigated the human current with practiced ease, her mind already calculating which bills could wait another week. The eviction notice had been unexpected. The building sold to a development company, residents given 30 days to vacate. Another complication in a life that seemed determined to remain complicated. That's when she saw her, an elderly woman standing bewildered in the center of Terminal B. She clutched the handle of a rolling suitcase with visible strain, her knuckles swollen with arthritis, her elegant wool coat a relic from another decade. What caught Emma's attention wasn't the woman's obvious wealth, the real pearl necklace, the designer scarf, but the look of pure vulnerability on her face. "Excuse me," Emma said, approaching with a gentle smile. "Can I help you with that?" Relief flooded the woman's features. "Oh, thank goodness. These hands aren't what they used to be." Her voice carried the refined accent of old money and good schools. "My son arranged for assistance, but there seems to have been a mix-up." "I'm happy to help," Emma replied, taking control of the stubborn suitcase. "I'm Emma, by the way. Margaret Wilson," the woman offered with a grateful smile. "I've been visiting my sister in Florida. Now I'm supposed to meet my son in the executive lounge, but everything looks different since my last visit." Emma recognized the name instantly. Wilson. As in Wilson Development Group. As in the company logo she'd seen on the documents attached to her eviction notice. The irony wasn't lost on her, helping the mother of the man whose company was displacing her, but Emma's smile never faltered. "The lounge is this way, Mrs. Wilson. Let me show you." As they walked, Margaret's steps were slow but determined. Such a blessing to find someone kind in an airport. Everyone rushing, no one seeing each other. Emma adjusted her pace. "I notice it all the time. People forget we're all just trying to get somewhere, often with our own burdens." "My son says the same thing," Margaret remarked. "Though he's usually the one being rushed past." She gave a small, proud smile. "He notices more than people think." At the lounge entrance, Emma showed her airline ID to the attendant, who nodded them through. She helped Margaret into a plush armchair, positioning the luggage within easy reach. "Thank you, dear," Margaret said, reaching out to grasp Emma's hand. Her fingers were cold, the skin paper thin over blue veins. "You've made an old woman's day much brighter." It was my pleasure, Emma replied, meaning it despite her exhaustion. These brief human connections were why she'd become a flight attendant, not for the glamour, which had proven illusory, but for moments like this. As Emma turned to leave, her airline ID slipped from her pocket, landing silently on the carpeted floor. She continued through the lounge doors, unaware of her loss or of the tall figure watching from the far side of the terminal. James Wilson had arrived early to surprise his mother. Instead, he found himself surprised by the unexpected kindness of a young woman in an airline uniform, treating his mother with a dignity that had nothing to do with the Wilson name or fortune. He stepped forward, retrieving the fallen ID card. Emma Carter, he read quietly, studying the photo of a woman with tired eyes but a genuine smile. Flight attendant, Horizon Airlines. By the time he looked up, she had vanished into the morning crowd. 3 days later, Emma's apartment buzzed with the frantic energy of 4 women preparing for work. The bathroom schedule, meticulously organized on a whiteboard, was running behind as usual. Emma gulped lukewarm coffee while ironing her uniform, her mind still tallying options for new housing. 27 days remained before eviction. "Mail call," shouted Mia, her roommate, tossing several envelopes onto Emma's bed. "Something fancy for you." "Cream envelope, expensive paper." Emma frowned, setting aside the iron. No one sent her anything on expensive paper. The envelope bore her name in a strong, masculine script. Inside was her lost ID card and a handwritten note. "Thank you for your kindness to my mother at Pearson. She hasn't stopped talking about the lovely flight attendant. If you'd allow me, I'd like to express my gratitude over coffee. James Wilson." A business card was enclosed. James Wilson, CEO, Wilson Development Group. "Holy shit," breathed Mia, reading over Emma's shoulder. "That's the Wilson. The 30 under 30 billionaire. The one buying up half of downtown." "The one buying our building," Emma corrected, sitting heavily on her bed. "He's the reason we're all being evicted. And he wants to buy you coffee." Mia's eyes widened. "This is like Pretty Woman, but with fewer hookers and more airplanes." Emma shoved the note into her pocket. "It's nothing like that. I helped his mother, he's being polite." But later, during a quiet moment on her Toronto-Montreal route, Emma found herself staring at Wilson's card. The irony was too perfect. The man responsible for her housing crisis, reaching out in gratitude. She should ignore it. She should definitely ignore it. Instead, she texted the number that evening, "Mr. Wilson, thank you for returning my ID. Coffee would be nice." Emma Carter. His response came within minutes, "Call me James. Lakefront Cafe tomorrow at 2. The cafe sat just outside Pearson, popular with airport staff. Emma arrived 5 minutes early, still questioning her decision. She spotted him immediately, tall, impeccably dressed in a casual way that suggested his clothes cost more than her monthly rent. He wasn't what she expected. Magazine photos captured his success but missed the slight nervousness in his posture as he waited. "Emma," he said, standing as she approached. "Thank you for coming." "James," she replied, sliding into the seat across from him. "Thank you for returning my ID. I didn't realize I'd lost it. Thank you for helping my mother." His voice softened. "She uses a cane at home but refuses it in public. Pride." He smiled fondly. "She said you treated her like a person, not a fragile antique." Emma shrugged. "It was nothing. Not to her. James studied her face. I was there, you know. I saw how tired you looked. Most people would have walked past. Emma shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. I don't think basic decency deserves a coffee reward. Neither do I, he agreed. But I've closed multi-million-dollar deals with less anxiety than I felt texting you. Emma laughed despite herself. Why? I'm just a flight attendant. That's exactly why, he said. You're real. Everyone in my world wants something: funding, connections, status. You just helped an old woman because she needed help. Their coffee stretched into a second hour. Emma found herself telling him about growing up in foster care after her parents died, about working 3 jobs to put herself through community college, about finding freedom in the sky. The irony, Emma finally said, setting down her mug, is that your company is the reason I'm apartment hunting. James frowned. What do you mean? The Victorian on Spadina. Your company purchased it last month. We all received eviction notices. The color drained from his face. I didn't know. The acquisitions team handles. He stopped, seeming to realize how that sounded. That's not an excuse. I should know these things. It's business, Emma said with forced lightness. Nothing personal. James leaned forward, expression intense. It feels personal from where I'm sitting. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition that their worlds, so dramatically different, had somehow become entangled. When they parted ways 3 hours later, they both knew that whatever this was, it wasn't over. Their third date found them walking through St. Lawrence Market on a crisp Saturday morning. Emma watched James navigate the weekend crowd with unexpected ease for someone whose face occasionally appeared on business magazines. He wore faded jeans and a simple sweater, his only concession to wealth the watch on his wrist, an heirloom from his grandfather, he'd explained, not a status symbol. You're staring, he noted, handing her a paper cup of cider. Just trying to reconcile the billionaire CEO with the guy haggling over cheese prices. James smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. My mother taught me that. Money doesn't entitle you to waste it. She grew up poor in the Maritimes. They wandered through stalls of produce and artisanal goods, James tasting everything offered, Emma more cautious with the samples. Her next paycheck was already allocated to moving expenses, security deposit, first month's rent if she could find a place she could afford. Tell me about growing up in the system, James said as they found a bench overlooking the water. If you don't mind. Emma wrapped her hands around her cup, the warmth a comfort against the autumn chill. It wasn't a movie orphanage with gruel and mean headmistresses, if that's what you're asking. It wasn't. She sighed. Just, temporary. Everything and everyone. Foster homes, schools, friends. I learned to pack light and leave without looking back. Is that why you became a flight attendant? The impermanence feels familiar. The question struck her with unexpected force. I never thought about it that way, but maybe. She tilted her head. What about you? Born with the proverbial silver spoon. Gold-plated, maybe, he corrected. My father built the company from nothing. I was raised with privilege but also with expectations. The Wilson name means something in the city. Heavy. Sometimes, he admitted. But I've never known anything else. He hesitated. About your building. Emma raised a hand. Don't. I'm not asking for special treatment. I know you're not. That's why I want to give it. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as reflecting internal conflict. The Victorian was slated for luxury condos, but I've been reviewing the plans. What if we renovated instead? Preserved the existing units, upgraded systems, kept rents stable for current tenants. Emma stared at him. You'd change a multi-million-dollar development plan because of one conversation over coffee. Because it's the right thing to do, he corrected. And because seeing the city through your eyes makes me question decisions I've made automatically before. Their worlds continued to intersect in ways neither had anticipated. Emma introduced James to her favorite hole-in-the-wall Vietnamese restaurant, where dinner for two cost less than the tip he'd leave at his usual establishments. James brought Emma to the symphony, watching her face during the performance rather than the stage. They discovered shared passions for photography, obscure films, and boats. James had learned to sail as a child. Emma had cleaned yachts one summer to make rent. You're good for him, James's business partner Robert told Emma at a charity gala where she felt hopelessly out of place despite the borrowed dress. He's less obsessed with work since meeting you. Obsessed. James has always been driven. Excellence. Perfection. Nothing less. It's made him successful, but not always happy. Robert watched James across the room, charming potential investors. He smiles now. Really smiles, not the camera version. Not everything was smooth. Emma bristled when James casually offered to take care of her housing situation by purchasing a condo she could stay in. The implication unintended but clear that she was a problem to be solved with money. I need to succeed on my own terms, she'd explained, more hurt than angry. I've fought for everything I have. It's not much, but it's mine. James had looked chastened. You're right. I'm sorry. He learned to consult rather than decide, to offer without presuming. Emma learned to accept occasional generosity without feeling it came with expectations. Their different backgrounds became less an obstacle and more a lens through which they each saw new perspectives. 3 months in, they'd found rhythm. Dinner at his penthouse when she returned from flights. Quiet evenings in her new apartment. James had restructured the development plan, the Victorian residents were staying. Sunday brunches with Margaret, who'd taken to Emma immediately. He's never brought a woman to Sunday brunch, Margaret confided during a kitchen moment. Not once in 10 years. Really? Emma asked, arranging cookies on Margaret's heirloom china. He's dated, of course. Society women, mostly. Appropriate matches. Margaret's eyes twinkled. But you're the first he's loved. Emma nearly dropped the platter. He hasn't said. He doesn't need to. A mother knows. Margaret patted Emma's hand. He looks at you the way his father looked at me. Like you're the answer to a question he didn't know he was asking. Snow fell in fat, lazy flakes outside the penthouse windows, turning Toronto's skyline into a glittering wonderland. Inside, Emma and James sat at his dining table, remnants of dinner between them, a bottle of wine half empty. Candlelight softened the modern edges of James's home, casting warm shadows across their faces. Tell me again about Rome, James said, refilling their glasses. The old woman with the roses. Emma smiled, remembering. She was selling roses outside the Pantheon. Ancient, wrinkled like a walnut, but standing tall in this brilliant red dress. I bought one, and she insisted on tucking it behind my ear. Called me Bella. I wish I'd seen it. You will, Emma assured him. We'll go together someday. The words hung between them, laden with promise. After 4 months together, they'd fallen into the comfortable rhythms of a relationship neither had been seeking. Emma had begun leaving clothes in his closet, James kept a toothbrush at her place. They hadn't spoken of love explicitly, but it lived in their shared glances, in the way James absently stroked her hair while reading, in how Emma knew exactly how he took his coffee. Emma set down her glass, suddenly serious. "I need to tell you something." James's hand found hers across the table. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. It's actually," she took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position on the international team." James's face lit up. "Emma, that's amazing. The long-haul routes you've been wanting." She nodded. "Based in London. 6 months, starting next month." 6 months, he repeated, his smile faltering slightly before recovering. "That's a tremendous opportunity. It's competitive. Only 3 attendants from Toronto were selected. Then they chose the best," James said, raising his wine glass. "To new adventures." They clinked glasses, but Emma couldn't help noticing something shift in his eyes, a shadow, there and gone so quickly she questioned whether she'd imagined it. "You're okay with this?" she asked cautiously. "Us being apart for 6 months?" "Of course," James replied, perhaps too quickly. "We'll make it work. I travel to Europe for business regularly anyway." Later, as they lay in bed, Emma traced patterns on James's chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her fingertips. "Talk to me," she whispered into the darkness. "What are you thinking?" James was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. "I'm thinking about time," he finally said. "How quickly it passes. How we assume there will always be more." "We'll have more," Emma assured him. "This isn't forever." "I know." He kissed her forehead. "I'm proud of you." "Really?" But over the following weeks, as Emma's departure grew closer, a subtle distance crept between them. James's texts became briefer, his calls less frequent. When they were together, he seemed physically present but mentally elsewhere, his thoughts hidden behind carefully constructed pleasantries. "Did I do something wrong?" Emma finally asked during a quiet dinner at her apartment. "No, of course not," James insisted, but the warmth in his eyes had cooled. "Just busy with the new development in Yorkville." Emma didn't believe him. As her departure date approached, the distance widened. James scheduled an unusual number of meetings and business trips, making it difficult for them to spend time together. "Maybe it's for the best," Emma told her roommate Mia as they packed her belongings. "We come from different worlds anyway. This was probably never going to work long term." Mia rolled her eyes. "That's the worst excuse I've ever heard. Different worlds. This isn't Romeo and Juliet." "You know what I mean," Emma sighed, carefully wrapping a framed photo of her and James. "His life is here, his company, his mother. Mine is wherever the job takes me." "Have you actually talked to him about this?" "Really talked?" Emma hesitated, folding a sweater with excessive care. "He says we'll make it work, but his actions tell a different story." The truth was harder to voice, she was afraid. Afraid that what they'd found was too fragile to survive the distance. Afraid that without her physical presence, James would remember all the reasons they shouldn't make sense: the class difference, their opposite upbringings, the society expectations for someone of his position. Most of all, she was afraid that loving him meant eventually losing herself, compromising the independence she'd fought so hard to achieve. Because despite never having said the words aloud, Emma knew she loved James Wilson. Not his wealth or his status, but the man who brought her tea in bed on Sunday mornings, who listened to her stories with genuine interest, who really saw her when most of the world looked past. 2 days before her departure, Emma decided the uncertainty was worse than any truth. She drove to his office building downtown, determined to have an honest conversation. The receptionist recognized her immediately. "He's in a meeting but should be finishing soon. You can wait in his office if you'd like." As Emma approached the partially open door, she heard James's raised voice. "No, Robert, I can't just expand to London because Emma's going there. The market timing isn't right, and you know it." Emma froze, her hand halfway to the door. "Maybe not," Robert replied, "but have you considered what happens after 6 months? Long-distance relationships are hard, especially when you're clearly this invested." "Of course I've considered it," James snapped. "I've barely thought about anything else. But I can't ask her to give up this opportunity. She's worked too hard for it." "And you're terrified of losing her," Robert stated simply. There was a long pause before James replied, his voice quieter now. "Yes. I'm terrified of losing her. No, I haven't told her I love her yet." Emma's handbag slipped from her fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The conversation inside immediately stopped. "Hello?" James called out. Emma considered fleeing. The elevator was just steps away but forced herself to push the door open. James stood by his desk, phone in hand, his expression shifting from irritation to shock when he saw her. "Emma, he began, but seemed at a loss for words. "I came to talk," she said quietly, "but I think I heard what I needed to hear." James set the phone down, Robert forgotten on the other end. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." Emma gathered her courage, ignoring the rapid beating of her heart. "You're pulling away because I'm leaving, aren't you? Making it easier to end things." "That's not." James ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicated," Emma challenged, her voice stronger now. "If you have something to say it now." The silence between them stretched painfully. James took a step toward her, then stopped, as if an invisible barrier separated them. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, Toronto stretched out in a tapestry of glass and steel, the same city they'd both inhabited for years without crossing paths until a dropped bag changed everything. "I don't want to hold you back," James finally said. "This opportunity is everything you've worked for." "That's not an answer," Emma replied, disappointment settling like a weight in her chest, "and it's not your decision to make alone." "Emma, I leave in 2 days," she cut him off. "If you figure out what you really want, you know where to find me." She turned and walked out, ignoring his call of her name. Her vision blurred with unshed tears as she rode the elevator down, nodding mechanically at the receptionist who gave her a concerned look. Outside, the winter air hit her face with shocking coldness, crystallizing her tears on her lashes. She'd hoped for clarity but felt more confused than ever. She'd heard him admit he loved her to Robert, not to her, yet he couldn't say it to her face. What kind of love retreated at the first sign of difficulty? What kind of future could they build if he withdrew rather than face challenges together? As she drove home, her phone buzzed repeatedly with calls from James, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. She needed space to think, to decide if a relationship with someone who couldn't communicate his feelings was worth fighting for. That evening, she sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by half-packed suitcases. Her phone screen showed 17 missed calls from James, 5 voicemails, and multiple texts. All variations on "we need to talk," but none addressing what she'd overheard. None containing the words she most needed to hear. A knock at her bedroom door interrupted her thoughts. Mia poked her head in, concern etched on her features. "You okay? You've been staring at your phone for an hour." Emma set the device aside. "Just thinking. About tall, rich, and emotionally constipated." "Despite everything," Emma laughed. "That's not fair." "He's not, it's more complicated than that." Mia entered, perching on the edge of the bed. "Look, I don't pretend to understand what it's like dating someone from his world. But I know what I see when he looks at you. And I know what I see when you talk about him. Which is two people terrified of the same thing." Mia squeezed her hand. "Loving someone means being vulnerable. For someone like you, who's had to be strong your whole life, that's scary. For someone like him, who's probably been surrounded by people wanting things from him, it's terrifying," Emma finished softly, remembering James's words to Robert. "So the question isn't whether he loves you," Mia said. "The question is whether love is enough to overcome fear." The following day passed in a blur of preparations. Emma's phone remained stubbornly silent, no more calls or texts from James. She told herself it was confirmation that ending things now was for the best, that a clean break would hurt less than a slow, distance-induced fade. But each time she checked her phone, disappointment surged anew. By the time she boarded her flight to London the next evening, Emma had convinced herself she was making the right choice. 6 months abroad would give her perspective. If what they'd shared was real, it would withstand the separation. If not, better to know now before she invested more of herself. As the plane lifted off from Pearson International, Emma watched Toronto's lights recede beneath her, wondering if she was leaving behind something precious or simply facing the inevitable end of a relationship that had always been on borrowed time. In the first-class cabin that James had insisted on upgrading her to his parting gift, delivered via the airline without personal contact, Emma closed her eyes against fresh tears. "Goodbye, James," she whispered to herself as Canada disappeared beneath the clouds, wondering if some goodbyes were meant to be permanent. London greeted Emma with persistent drizzle and grey skies fitting accompaniment to her mood. Her company flat in Kensington was small but charming, with a tiny balcony overlooking a quiet garden square. Under different circumstances, she would have been thrilled with the assignment, the location, the opportunity. Instead, she moved through orientation in a daze, muscle memory carrying her through training sessions and introductions. At night, she lay awake listening to rain against the windows, calculating what time it was in Toronto, wondering what James was doing. "You look like you could use this," said a voice with a crisp British accent. Emma glanced up from her paperwork in the crew lounge at Heathrow to find an older flight attendant extending a cup of tea. The woman's silver hair was pulled into an immaculate bun, her uniform pristine despite the early hour. "Thank you," Emma accepted gratefully. "Maggie Pearson," the woman introduced herself, settling into the adjacent chair. 30 years with this airline, and I can spot homesickness from across a terminal. Is it that obvious? Only to those who felt it?" Maggie's sharp eyes softened. "First international posting." Emma nodded. "It's an amazing opportunity. But..." "No but," Emma insisted, too quickly. "It's what I wanted." Maggie sipped her own tea. "In my experience, when someone says no but that emphatically, there's usually a very big but indeed. Despite herself, Emma laughed. There was something comforting about Maggie's directness, reminiscent of Margaret Wilson's no-nonsense warmth. Over the following weeks, Maggie became Emma's unofficial mentor, showing her the cruise shortcuts through Heathrow, the best places to eat during layovers, the unwritten rules of international routes. Any plans for your 3-day break? Maggie asked 2 months into Emma's assignment, finding her in the lounge reviewing the next week's schedule. Museums, maybe catch a show. Maggie studied her with knowing eyes. Still no word from your Canadian fellow? Emma shook her head. After leaving Toronto without resolving things with James, she'd expected something. A grand gesture. A heartfelt letter. At minimum, a proper conversation. Instead, silence had fallen between them, broken only by a formal email confirming her housing allowance had been paid for the duration of her assignment, the email signed by James's assistant, not James himself. His loss, Maggie declared firmly, though she noticed how Emma still checked her phone every few minutes. Though I suspect there's more to the story than you've shared. Emma fiddled with her teacup. It's complicated. Love usually is, dear. Meanwhile in Toronto, James sat in his mother's kitchen, pushing food around his plate during their weekly Sunday dinner. The routine continued even without Emma's presence, though the conversation felt hollow, the house emptier somehow. Margaret watched her son with concern. The dark circles under his eyes had deepened over the past 2 months, his usual confident posture giving way to a slight slump. You haven't mentioned Emma in weeks, she finally said. I assume there's been no contact. James set down his fork. She's busy building her career in London. I'm busy here. Nonsense, Margaret scoffed. You're making the same mistake your father did. James looked up sharply. What do you mean? Your father traveled constantly when we were young, building the business. He said he always thought there would be more time to express his feelings. Margaret's eyes grew distant with memory. When he got sick, his biggest regret was all the moments he'd missed, believing tomorrow would always come. This is different, James argued. Emma and I, we want different things. Do you? Margaret challenged. Or are you afraid to want the same things? The question lingered long after dinner ended. Back in his penthouse, James stood at the wall of windows, staring at the city lights. On his desk sat airline schedules and property listings for London that Robert had compiled weeks ago, information he'd requested but hadn't acted upon. His phone rang, displaying Robert's name. The Frankfurt meeting is confirmed for next week, Robert reported. The German investors are eager to move forward. Book it, James replied wearily. James, Robert's voice turned hesitant, about the London expansion we discussed. What about it? The properties you were interested in, one's been sold, but the others are still available. James watched his reflection in the window, a man he barely recognized these days. Let's revisit it. What changed your mind? Robert asked, surprise evident in his voice. Nothing changed, James admitted softly. I just stopped running from what I already knew. Across the ocean, Emma stepped off a flight from Paris, exhausted but satisfied after smoothly handling a medical emergency on board. As passengers deplaned, she noticed an elderly French couple struggling with their carry-ons. Allow me, she offered in careful French, helping them navigate to their connecting gate. You are very kind, the husband said in accented English. Our daughter usually travels with us, but today we are alone. I'm happy to help, Emma replied, reminded inevitably of her first encounter with Margaret. "You have a gentle soul," the wife observed, studying Emma's face. "But some sadness in your eyes." Emma blinked in surprise at the perceptiveness. "Love, perhaps," the woman continued with a knowing smile. "My Henry had that same look when we were separated during his military service." "We worked it out," Henry added, patting his wife's hand. "When you find love, distance is just a detail, not an obstacle." Their words stayed with Emma throughout the evening. After returning to her flat, she found herself dialing Margaret's number before she could reconsider. "Emma, dear." Margaret answered warmly. What a lovely surprise. They chatted about London, Margaret's garden, and the charity gala's progress before Emma finally gathered her courage. "How is he?" she asked softly, the question she'd been holding back since the call began. "Stubborn," Margaret replied without hesitation. "Working too much. Smiling too little." She paused. "He misses you." "He hasn't called. He's just like his father." "Terrible at showing it," Margaret paused. "But he's been asking about London property markets. Draw your own conclusions." That night, Emma dreamed of Toronto, of lake breezes and skyscrapers, of James's penthouse and his rare, genuine laugh. Perhaps some distances weren't meant to be measured in kilometers or oceans, but in the courage it took to bridge them. Frankfurt Airport bustled with the controlled chaos particular to international terminals. James stood at the arrivals gate after his investor meeting, watching reunions unfold around him. A young woman flung herself into her partner's arms, both laughing through tears of joy. An elderly man held up a sign with his wife's name, his face lighting up when she appeared. Each reunion a reminder of what he'd let slip away through fear and pride. James pulled out his phone and called Robert. "The meeting went well?" Robert asked immediately. "Very," James confirmed, "but I need you to clear my schedule for next week." "All of it?" "James, you have the council meeting on Tuesday and—" "All of it," James repeated firmly. "I'm going to London." "About time," Robert muttered. "Want me to let Emma know?" James thought for a moment. "No, I need to do this right." As he ended the call, James felt a sense of clarity that had eluded him for months. He'd spent his life building security, financial, professional, emotional, creating walls to protect himself from disappointment and loss. Emma had walked through those walls without even trying, simply by being herself. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. He didn't want safety anymore. He wanted Emma, with all the vulnerability and uncertainty that entailed. On her next day off, Emma found herself at Portobello Market, browsing antique stalls without much interest. Her phone chimed with a text from Mia back in Toronto. "James came by the apartment today looking for your London address. Didn't give it to him." "You're welcome. But thought you should know what's going on." Before she could reply, another text arrived, this one from Margaret. "Forgive an old woman's meddling, but some journeys are worth taking, even when the destination is uncertain. Call him, dear." Emma found a quiet corner away from the market crowds and dialed James's number before she could lose her nerve. It went straight to voicemail. "James, it's me," she said after the beep. "I think we need to talk." "Really talk this time? Call me when you can." She hung up, not knowing that at that very moment, James was boarding a flight to London, his phone already switched to airplane mode, a small velvet box tucked securely in his jacket pocket. The following afternoon, Emma returned to her flat after a quick grocery run to find a figure sitting on the steps of her building. Her heart skipped as she recognized James, looking tired from travel but determined. "You're a hard person to find," he said, standing as she approached. "Your roommate wouldn't give me your address." "Mia's protective," Emma replied, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "How did you find me?" "Your neighbor Mrs. Patterson. Apparently, she's a fan of Canadian real estate developers." His attempt at humor fell flat in the tension between them. "Why are you here, James?" Emma asked, clutching her grocery bag like a shield. "Because I've been an idiot," he said simply. "I was scared of losing you, so I pulled away, which nearly guaranteed I would lose you. I've never been good at this, at being vulnerable, but I'm learning." Emma remained silent, her heart pounding as James took a step closer. "I love you, Emma Carter," he said, his voice steady now. "I've loved you since I saw you help my mother at the airport. Not because you were beautiful, though you are, but because you were kind when you thought no one was watching." The grocery bag slipped from Emma's fingers, apples rolling across the sidewalk. Neither moved to retrieve them. "You heard me say it to Robert," James continued, "but I couldn't say it to you because saying it meant acknowledging how much power you have to hurt me. My whole life, I've controlled everything: business, investments, relationships. But I can't control this. I can't control how I feel about you." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you just tell me that? Why push me away?" "Because I was afraid that loving me would hold you back. That you'd resent me eventually for standing between you and your dreams." James ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture of internal conflict. "My father did that to my mother, expected her to orbit his world, adjust to his schedule. I saw what it cost her. So you decided for both of us." Emma's voice sharpened. "Without even asking what I wanted?" "I told you I was being an idiot," James reminded her, the ghost of a smile crossing his features. "I'm hoping it's not too late to fix that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. "I know it's fast. I know we have things to figure out. But I don't want to waste another day pretending I'm not completely in love with you." He opened the box, revealing not a ring as Emma had momentarily feared, but a small silver key. "What is this?" she asked, confusion replacing anxiety. "A key to our future, whatever form that takes. It opens a flat I purchased in Notting Hill. And before you protest," he added quickly, seeing her expression change, "I'm not asking you to live there. I'm asking for the chance to be near you while you finish your assignment. To prove that I'm willing to adjust my world to include yours. To show you that distance doesn't have to mean apart." Emma took the key, its weight surprisingly substantial in her palm. "You bought a flat in London just to be near me." "I bought a flat in London because my company is expanding here," James corrected with a smile, "but I chose Notting Hill because it's 10 minutes from you. I also have a return ticket dated 6 months from now when your assignment ends. What happens between now and then is up to us." Emma looked at the key, then at James' travel, rumpled, anxious, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. This wasn't the confident CEO or the polished businessman. This was just James, putting his heart in her hands, trusting her not to break it. "You flew across an ocean to tell me you love me," she said softly. "I'd fly across a dozen oceans if that's what it took," he replied. "But I'm really hoping I won't have to." Emma closed the distance between them, the key pressed between their palms as their fingers intertwined. "I love you too, James Wilson." even when you're being an idiot. His smile, rare and genuine, was the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. The following 3 months were a careful rebuilding of what fear had nearly destroyed. James extended his London stay, working remotely while they rediscovered each other. True to his word, he maintained his own flat, respecting Emma's need for independence while making it clear he wanted to be close. They spent weekends exploring Britain, the Lake District, the Scottish Highlands, coastal Cornwall, places Emma had always wanted to visit but never had the time or resources to see. On a rainy Sunday in the Cotswolds, sitting by a fire in a centuries-old pub, James confessed his deepest fears about their relationship. "I watched my parents drift apart because of my father's constant travel," he admitted, turning his pint glass slowly. By the time he realized what he was losing, the distance between them was about more than just kilometers. "Why didn't you just tell me that?" Emma asked. "Pride. Fear. I didn't want to be the man who holds back the woman he loves." James reached for her hand. "But I also didn't want to be the man who loses her because he couldn't be honest." Emma shared her own insecurities about fitting into his world, the whispers at charity galas, the curious looks from business associates who clearly wondered what the billionaire saw in a flight attendant from Nowhere Special. "We're quite the pair," James joked as they walked back to their quaint B&B, raindrops glistening on cobblestone streets. "Both terrified of losing something we never properly claimed in the first place." As Emma's London assignment drew to a close, they faced a new decision: what next? James had established a European division of his company, splitting his time between Toronto and London. Emma had been offered a permanent position on the international team, a dream job with more flexibility than she'd ever had. The answer came unexpectedly during a video call with Margaret. "James mentioned you helped an elderly couple at Heathrow last week," Margaret said. "Reminded me of how we met." "They reminded me of you," Emma admitted. "Sweet, a bit lost, just needing someone to take a moment." "You know," Margaret mused, "there's something wrong with how we treat older travelers. Airports are overwhelming enough for the young and able-bodied." Later that night, as they walked along the Thames, James couldn't stop thinking about his mother's words. "What if there was a way to help more people like my mother?" he asked Emma. "Like that French couple you helped." "What are you thinking?" "A foundation," James said, his eyes bright with purpose. "Professional assistance services in major airports, comfortable lounges, even overnight accommodations when flights are delayed." Emma squeezed his hand, deeply moved by the idea. "That's incredible." "There's more," James added. "We'd need a program director, someone who understands both the airline industry and the needs of travelers. Someone compassionate, experienced, and highly organized." Emma's eyes widened. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a purpose," James corrected. "Whether you take it or not, whether we're together or not, this foundation will help people." "That's your legacy, Emma. You inspired it with one simple act of kindness." When Emma's assignment ended, she returned to Toronto with James, not as a flight attendant, but as the founding director of the Margaret Wilson Travelers Assistance Foundation. The transition felt right, a way to combine her airline experience with the newfound confidence James had helped her discover in herself. 6 months later, they stood in the newly renovated VIP lounge at Pearson International, now bearing a discreet sign, the Margaret Wilson Travelers Assistance Lounge. Tomorrow would bring the official opening, with press and donors and Margaret herself cutting the ribbon. But tonight, it was just the two of them, standing in the spot where their story had begun. "This is where it all started," James said, stopping at the exact place where Emma had helped Margaret. "Where I first saw you. Your mother dropped her bag right here," Emma recalled, "and you stopped to help when a dozen others walked past." To Emma's surprise, James lowered himself to one knee, taking her hands in his. "That moment changed everything for me." Emma's breath caught. "James. I had this whole speech prepared," he admitted, suddenly looking nervous. "About how you taught me that real connections matter more than success or security. About how I want to build something lasting with you. But standing here, I can only think of one thing to say." From his pocket, he produced a ring, a simple solitaire diamond that caught the light from above. "Emma Carter, you helped a stranger without expecting anything in return. I'm hoping you'll now help me for the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" Emma's vision blurred with tears as she considered the unlikeliness of their journey from an airport encounter to this moment, their lives now inextricably intertwined. "Yes," she whispered, then more confidently, "Yes, I will." As James slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her, the lounge door opened to reveal Margaret, beaming with delight. "Did she say yes?" she asked, though the answer was obvious in their embrace. "Of course she did," James replied, unable to stop smiling. Margaret hurried forward to embrace them both. "I told you this was fate." Emma laughed through her tears. "You were right all along." "A mother usually is," Margaret replied with a wink. "Though I will say, as matchmaking goes, this was my finest work yet." James wrapped an arm around each of them, the two women who had transformed his life in entirely different but equally profound ways. "I think we can all agree that some of the best journeys begin with a simple act of kindness." Emma looked at the ring on her finger, then at the space where she'd first met Margaret, and finally at James, the man who had seen her kindness and fallen in love with her heart. "And end exactly where they're meant to," she added softly. "In the quiet moments of life between flights and meetings, amid the rush of daily existence, we make choices that seem small but ripple outward in ways we cannot foresee." Emma didn't help Margaret that day expecting anything in return. James didn't return her ID card looking for love. Yet in these simple acts of seeing another person's need and responding with humanity, a connection formed that transcended wealth, background, and circumstance. Their story reminds us that kindness is never wasted, especially when offered without expectation of reward. In a world increasingly defined by digital connections and surface-level interactions, genuine compassion remains our most powerful currency. James and Emma's journey also speaks to courage, not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the quiet bravery required to be vulnerable, to admit fears, to choose love even when it means stepping into uncertainty. They each had to confront their deepest insecurities, Emma's fear of losing her hard-won independence, James's terror of relinquishing control. Perhaps most importantly, their story challenges us to question the barriers we construct between ourselves and others. The assumptions we make about different worlds often serve only to keep us isolated from experiences and connections that might transform us. When we dare to see beyond these artificial boundaries, we discover that human hearts speak the same language, regardless of the circumstances they beat within. We've traveled together through Emma and James's story, witnessing how a moment of kindness in an airport created ripples that transformed not only their lives, but countless others through the foundation it inspired. But their story isn't just for entertainment, it's an invitation. An invitation to notice the moments where you can choose compassion over indifference. The elderly person struggling with groceries. The co-worker silently battling personal challenges. The stranger overwhelmed by circumstances you can ease with the smallest gesture. Has a stranger's kindness ever changed your path? Or have you extended a helping hand that made a difference to someone else? Share your story in the comments below. Tell us about a time when someone's thoughtfulness altered your day, or how helping another brought unexpected joy into your own life. If this story touched something in you, consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that small acts matter. Sometimes the hand we extend to help another becomes the hand that also lifts us. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary hidden within ordinary days, and remember, in a world often defined by what divides us, kindness remains our most powerful connector. You never know when your simple gesture might be the beginning of someone else's life-changing story. After all, the greatest distances we bridge aren't measured in miles, but in the courage it takes to reach across the spaces between hearts.